if we have a foreign operation and our foreign operation prepares their own financial statements, and then at the end of the year, we are going to consolidate our financial statements, then we have to translate the financial statements of our foreign operation using the reporting currency of that of the parent or the head office. So how do we translate financial statements? Okay. Now take note, for forex translation, that's only applicable no for forex operations. Diba? Lagay lang natin dito. Let's talk about FS. Translation ng forex operation. Magtra-translate ka lang if there is a tayo sumunod ng kamay ko ngayon. If there is a foreign operation, and there's a foreign operation. Now, this could be in the form of, let's say, a subsidiary or let's say a branch. Okay, so what about sales agency? For sales agency kasi there is no need to prepare a separate financial statement. Okay, but for branch and subsidiary, there is a separate financial statement. No? And then, in their financial statements, in the subsidiary and in the branch financial statement, okay, the reporting currency, yan, the reporting currency is different. Different from that of the parent. Okay. And then, take note, we translate that because we have the intention to prepare consolidated or combined, consolidated or combined financial statements. Okay? So, so for example, you have here your parent. You have here the parent. And the parent is, let's say, here in the Philippines. So, the reporting currency of the parent is Philippine peso. Okay? And then you have here your subsidiary. And your subsidiary is found in US. Nagpre-prepare sila ng FS nila doon. And the reporting currency is in dollars. Okay? And then you have another subsidiary. Ayan. You have another subsidiary. Let's say it's in ano ba? Sige, US na. Natawad na akong mag-isip. To combine their financial statements, you have to measure. No? You have to measure their financial statements, translate them in a way na magiging pesos yung ginagamit ng mga yan. So that we can combine them or consolidate them with the financial statements of the parent. So, how do we translate? Okay, ganito muna. Magkwekwento muna ako. Kasi maraming mga nalilito eh. Sir, when we read the books, okay, there is remeasurement, translation, you have the current rate method, you have the temporal method na actually luma na yun. You have the integral, and sometimes nalilito kami because based on standard, we are just using one method. How come this question has a lot of qualifiers, parang marami pa kami hindi nalalaman. Ganito kasi yan. Okay? Dati, we have two methods. Okay? You have the current rate method na actually yun lang naman ang ginagamit natin ngayon. No? You have the current rate. You have the current rate method. Now, take note, I'm talking about the method, ha? Current rate method. And may tinatawag tayo dati na temporal method. Okay. Dito nagpauso sila Wiley. Ito may isang babaeng author, nakalimutan ko lang yung pangalan niya. It's Karen something. Parang ganun. Now, to compare the two, dati we look at the operations, no? The operations, the operations of the subsidiary or the foreign operation. If the foreign operation is considered to be not an integral part of the operation of the parent or the head office, you use the current rate method. So if that foreign operation is not integral, okay. But if it's an integral part, we use the temporal method. Okay, so ganun yan. And sometimes, instead of saying that the operation is integral or not an integral part of the parent's operation, sometimes they use the term as, such as, ano na yun, translation. Okay, so lagay natin dito. Translation. Okay, and then dito, remeasurement. Remeasurement. Okay, so sasabihin, in the remeasurement of financial statements or in the translation of financial statements, that means, pag ginamit yung translation, okay, they are describing the operation as not an integral and they are expecting you to use the current rate method. Okay, so, ganun yun. Now, in the adjustment, no, let's talk about the adjustment. The adjustment or the difference under current rate method, this is treated as a cumulative translation adjustment. Okay, also known as your CTA. Okay, and this one will be shown in the stockholders equity section as part of the accumulated other comprehensive income items. Okay, so nalilito ko, ang dami masyado. Basta, the difference is your cumulative translation adjustment, which will be found in your stockholders equity. Under temporal method, the difference is known as the translation gain or loss, which will be found in your income statement. Okay, kita nyo, ito sa balance sheet, ito sa income statement. So, those are the major differences. Sometimes, they don't use these terms, no? Ewan ko kung na-encounter na ninyo to. It says that the functional currency. Ano yung functional currency? This is the currency used to transact with other entities. Okay? The functional currency of the subsidiary of the foreign entity is the foreign currency. Ibig sabihin, they're expecting you to use the current rate method. And then, sa temporal method, they will use the term reporting currency. Reporting currency. I'm going to discuss this because it's going to make our life easier later. Pero wag muna kayo magpanik. Basta makinig lang kayo. Okay, so how do we translate? How do we translate your financial statements? In the current rate method, okay, starting with the income statement na lang. In the income statement, you have two items here, right? You have here your revenue and you have here your expenses. Dati, we use the weighted average. We use the weighted average rate, okay, to translate your revenues and your expenses. And this including your depreciation. whether it's monetary or non-monetary ha. Now, eto kasi, ngayon, eto na yung ginagamit eh. Hindi na siya ganyan. Your revenue and expenses will be translated using the historical method, ideally, ganun siya, no? Pero, for practical purposes, we're going to use the weighted average. Anyway, I will discuss more on that later. Ito yung lumang standard muna. Okay, so, ayan. Now, for the temporal method in your income statement, medyo kakaiba siya. Okay, because we are going to first identify your monetary and non-monetary items. Okay? For monetary items, whether in your revenue, no? In your revenue, if it's monetary, okay, if this is a monetary item, we use the weighted average rate. For non-monetary, okay, for non-monetary items, okay, we use the historical rate. Ayan. Same with your expenses. For monetary expenses, we use the weighted average. For non-monetary, okay, for non-monetary items, we use the historical rate. This means that depreciation, which is a non-monetary item, okay, will be translated using the historical rate. Okay? Parang medyo nakaka-nervyos, ano? Okay, dito naman tayo sa balance sheet items. For balance sheet items, under the current rate method, okay, assets and liabilities will be translated using the current rate method. Stockholders' equity items, okay, will be translated using the historical rate. Yan. Meaning, the issuance of shares of stocks, ganun, o kaya pag may mga dividends, may mga retirement, historical rate po pala yan. Now, your retained earnings will be at its translated value. Okay, or your translated amount. Meaning, you have to compute, no? You have to compute for your translated beginning balance, okay? And then you have to add your translated net income less your translated dividends, and in this case, using your historical rate, you will get the ending balance of your retained earnings, which is the translated amount. Now, take note, under the current rate method, okay, the difference in the translation is found in your stockholders' equity, which means that medyo dito tayo maglalaro, okay? You have to compute first for your income, for your translated net income by translating your revenues and expenses. Once you get your translated net income, you're now going to put that here, compute for your translated ending balance, okay? And syempre hindi yan magbabalanse, no? But you can check. You can always use your equation, which is asset is equal to liabilities plus capital. Okay, so ayan, so if you deduct liabilities from that of your asset, that should be equal to your stockholders' equity. So the difference is now your cumulative translation adjustment. Now, let's go to your temporal method muna. Ganun din for assets and liabilities. If it's monetary, nade-delay tong pen ko. If it's monetary, you use your current, no? You use your current rate. Okay, and then you have your non-monetary. It's non-monetary. Wala, ayaw nang gumana. You use your historical rate. And ganun din, your stockholders equity, you use your historical rate. And take note, no? Take note that your retained earnings, or ending balance will be equal to your beginning balance. Yan. As usual, plus net income less your dividends. Okay, and that's now your ending balance. Parang pareho lang, no? Pero take note, here in the temporal method, okay, or remeasurement, the translation gain or loss is found in the income statement. So what you do is to start with the assets and liabilities, okay, and that should be the equal, that the difference should be equal to your stockholders equity, okay? So you translate your common stocks, dividends, mga ganon, and then you're going to work back and get your net income. Yan. You squeeze that. Pinaganda lang yung balancing figure. O you force balance. Okay. Anyway, you will get your net income and that should be your translated net income. Now you can use that to work back. Okay. After translating your revenues, no, and your expenses, okay, get the computed net income. If your net income, if your net income is different, no? If your net income is different with this net income right here, pag in-squeeze mo na yan, ibig sabihin, you will have a translation gain or loss, which will be found in your income statement. Parang balancing figure mo yan. So if you notice, in your current rate method, you start translating your income statement, okay, and you translate your balance sheet para magbalance yan, balancing figure mo, no? You have your CTA. In the temporal method, you start with the balance sheet, okay? You squeeze mo yung net income, translate your net income, ang balancing figure mo sa net income naman is your translation gain or loss. Okay po. Ngayon, pwede mong kalimutan lahat ito. So, sorry, diniscuss ko pa. Bakit kailangan mong kalimutan yan? Kasi ngayon, ang ginagamit na lang natin is the current rate method. Okay, in translation. So, okay. Sir, bakit mo pa diniscuss? Kasi there are some books, no, whose problems are not yet updated. Kinopya sa mga lumang libro wherein gumagamit pa sila ng temporal method, integral, not integral, ganun. Okay, so are we saying that this part right here is totally useless? Hindi naman. Kasi normally we use the current rate method, but during hyperinflationary periods, no, or when your foreign operation is operating under hyperinflationary economy, okay, minsan ginagamit natin ito. Okay? So, ayun. Although may bagong approach daw doon, mas madali. Hayaan mo na rin yung temporal method because it's hyperinflationary. Everything will be stated at their current value daw, and then the difference will be treated as a translation gain or loss. If there is a difference, it will just be a timing difference. Okay? And mag-accumulate naman daw yun sa retained earnings. But in some books, okay, they are strict with the temporal method. But they don't use these terms anymore. No, instead they will just tell you that the foreign operation is operating in a hyperinflationary economy. Compute for the following or translate the financial statements. This is what you are going to follow. Anyway, let's just focus on your current rate method. Okay? In translating your financial statements, saan ba mas maganda? Dito na lang. In translating your financial statements, it's better, kasi hindi ko na sinusulat pag nagsasalita ko, pero sige na. Ayan. Translation. In the translation of your financial statements, you start with the income statement. Na-discuss na natin to kanina. Two elements in your income statement, you have the revenue and you have the expenses. Normally, or ideally, isulat ko na nga yung ideally niyan. Ideally, kunyari, tama yung spelling ko. Yan. Ideally, your revenues and expenses should be translated using the historical rate. Okay? But for practical reasons, for practicality, tama ba yung spelling? Feeling ko parang double L yata to. Anyway, for practicality or for practical reasons, okay, we use the weighted average rate. I will have an example. We will have an example later. Makinig lang muna kayo. Okay? So, dapat historical siya. It's just that if there are a lot of transactions, no, revenue transactions, and expense transactions, it's so hard to monitor the fluctuations in our foreign exchange rates. Okay, so we'll just use the weighted average rate. Even for depreciation, dapat, no? Okay, ideally, it should be translated using the historical rate. Okay, that's the rate when the equipment was purchased. But if you have a lot of equipment purchased at different times, and then they are used uniformly naman throughout the year, o diba, parang napaka-unfair kapag historical. Okay? Napakahirap nun. So instead, okay, even if your depreciation is a non-monetary item, we use the weighted average rate. Okay po. Next, things for you to remember. Okay? You have to consider the number of transactions or frequency of transactions. For example, in a month, you only have 1 or 2 transactions, or in a year, you only have a few transactions. Let's say you're selling real properties, ganun. You should use historical rate na. Diba? Kasi it's easy to identify. So, ibig sabihin, okay, ayun lang. Madali. Hindi mo pwedeng irason yung for practicality reasons. What do you mean practicality reasons? Dalawa, tatlo na lang yung transaction mo. So, mag-historical rate ka na. Okay, next. Okay, let's say materiality naman. Don't forget to consider materiality. Kunyari, maganda yung sulat ko. What do I mean materiality? For example, there are a lot of transactions affecting your revenue, but let's say there's one very special transaction which is around 20 or 25%. Now, I'm not saying that 20% is the rule, no? This is just an example. Because take note, materiality is subjective. It's subjective, so you have to use your professional judgment. What may be material to you may not be material to me. Okay, so let's say that out of your total revenue, 20% of that came from a one-time transaction from one customer. This one, you can translate this using the historical rate, and all the rest, because they are immaterial siguro or there are a lot of transactions, you can use the weighted average rate. Okay po? So those are just some of the things that you have to consider, the frequency and the materiality. Okay, so now you have your translated revenue and expense. What you will get will be the translated net income. Okay, you can now proceed with the translation of your balance sheet, your statement of financial position, starting with your assets and liabilities. Regardless of whether they are monetary or non-monetary, we use the current rate to translate that. Okay, your closing rate, your closing rate, your closing rate, okay, that's your current rate at balance sheet date. Yan, at balance sheet date. Okay? So, madali, multiply mo lang naman, di ba? Your assets and liabilities. Now, for your capital, nandito yung balancing figure mo eh. What are the components of your capital? Components such as your common stocks, mga ganun, other capital transactions, dividends, they should be translated using the historical rate. Okay. Now, with an exemption to your retained earnings, you have to be cautious. No? You don't just multiply your retained earnings. You have to compute for your retained earnings. Okay. Now, what do I mean you have to compute? Okay, you have to get the translated beginning balance. This one will be given. No? It will come from your previous financial statements. Okay, if there are translated financial statements okay, in the past, and then you add your translated net income. Okay, what's this translated net income? This is your net income computed after translating your revenues and expenses. Okay, so siya po ito. If there are dividends declared, okay, you deduct your dividends, okay, which is based on your historical rate. Ayan. So, this one is add. Baka hindi nyo makita kasi this one is add and this one is deduct. And you will get your retained earnings. Okay? Hindi po magbabalance yan. Ang balancing figure mo na, okay, will now be your cumulative translation adjustment. You will have a difference. That's now your cumulative translation adjustment or CTA. Okay, which is treated as part of your accumulated OCI. Okay, other comprehensive income, which is part of your stockholders' equity. Okay, so how do you compute that? Diba? Balancing figure, no? You have your assets less liabilities. Okay. What is asset minus liabilities? That's actually your stockholders' equity or capital. That should be your stockholders' equity. Okay? Anong gagawin mo na next? Less yung na-translate natin na stockholders' equity item. Okay? Less your ending balance of the retained earnings. The translated retained earnings. And you will be left with your cumulative translation adjustment. Okay po? So, ayun. Now, kanina nabanggit ko yung hyperinflationary economy. Okay, so what is this hyperinflationary economy? Let's put that here. Wala na yata ang tilta nito. Hyperinflationary economy. Okay, the best way, not the best. Bakit siya the best? Kasi may mga ibang methods pa. But the best way to translate your financial statements okay, under hyperinflationary operations yan, is by using the temporal method. Nagluloko yung pen ko. Ano ba itong hyperinflationary? This is when bakit nawala? Nagtampo yata. Okay, tuloy natin. Medyo nawala ako sa hyperinflationary. When do we say that there is hyperinflationary economy? Okay, when, ano yung mga indicators natin dito? Marami yan eh. Like for example, if your prices, no? Your prices will go up. Hindi lang mga prices. Like for example, you have your interest. Yan. Wages, okay? If they will rise. okay, by 100%, okay, for the last 3 years. Okay, we can consider them to be hyperinflationary economies na. Okay, what are the examples here? Before, I think you have um, I, what I can remember, you have Venezuela. Okay, Venezuela. Meron pa Zimbabwe. Ano ba yung spelling ko? Okay. Ano nyo na lang, i-google nyo na lang. I think you also have Hungary. Okay. Meron pa eh. Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia. And so on and so forth. Okay. They were able to experience this. I think what happened was there is an overprinting, no? Okay. Overprinting. Overprinting of money. They want to they want to paano ba? They want to recover, okay, from their economy. So what they did was to print more money and then put that into circulation. Because of that, ang dami nilang pera, tumaas yung mga prices. Okay, the prices went up. Kaya sila naging hyperinflationary. So, parang ganun. What are the other things that you have to remember? Yeah, we also mentioned your monetary items. So, what are monetary versus non-monetary? Monetary versus non-monetary item. Okay, so pag sinabi natin monetary, they can be easily converted into cash, okay? So these are highly liquid. And because they are highly liquid, easily convertible into cash, most of the time, they are defined as assets with fixed value. Okay? Asset with fixed value or determinable value or assets with specific. Mas maganda to. Specific cash value. Okay, so there you go. For non-monetary, it's the opposite. They are not highly liquid. There are no fixed value. No? Ibig sabihin nito, if in your financial statements, it's valued at 10,000, it may not be exactly 10,000 kapag binenta sa market. Okay, so there's no specific cash value. Some examples here, no, some examples in your monetary. Okay, you have here your cash. Okay, you have here your marketable. Ayan. You have here your marketable securities. For non-monetary naman, you have examples like property, plant, and equipment. Okay, property, plant, and equipment, your intangibles, and like your goodwill, ano pa ba yung mga intangibles natin? Trademark, okay, lease, okay, and inventory. Ito, issue talaga to. Inventory. Okay. Most of the time, it's classified as non-monetary. Why? Because your inventory, okay, may be obsolete. May not be updated and may mga spoilage. Okay, so the value of your inventory may not be equal to its cash value. Okay? But it actually depends on your inventory. No? If your inventory are highly marketable, like for example, gold, silver, titanium, those are your inventory, then they may be, yun naman yung sinabi they may be classified as part of your monetary items. Okay? So, ayun. Let's have an example. Iinat lang ako saglit. Okay? Kunyari, we have the following. Ano bang maganda? Let's say you have here your cash. You have your accounts receivable. Maybe you have your land. Ayan, mag-translate tayo. You have here your building. I-net na natin para maganda. Para mas madali. Net of accumulated depreciation. So for example, this one is 60,000. Your accounts receivable is 100,000. 100,000. Your land is 200,000. Okay. And then you have a building of 400. Okay, so that will be 6, 7, 60. You will now have 760 as your total assets. Okay. Now let's assume you have the following accounts payable. Then you have mortgage payable. You have here your common shares. Tapos you have here your retained earnings. Okay. Mortgage payable, accounts payable mo ay 100,000. Ito ay 200,000. So 300 na. Kunyari, ito ay 100 na. So para mag-balanse 764. Ito gawin natin 360. Okay. So your total liabilities and stockholders equity is also 760. Okay. Now, additional information, kunyari, ano ba, all the transactions, no? All the transactions for, let's say, land, building, land, building, ano pa ba, mortgage payable, okay, mortgage payable, and stocks na lang, stocks. Simple stocks. Are done in 2007. Ayan, so, kasi may bearing yan mamaya kapag non-monetary tayo. And then, okay, you have the following rates, no? For 2007, let's just assume that from 2007, 5 years, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 2007 to 2012, our rates are 18, 15 pala. Baka pala malito kayo. Mamaya na pala yung rates. Let's just focus on assumptions muna. To make things easier, there are no dividends. You have no dividends. You have no dividends declared. And so I guess that's it. Ito na. So, ano na yung mga rate natin? Dito tayo maglalagay ng rate mamaya. So, our rates for 2007, okay, 2007 is 1:15. And then from 2007 to 2012, okay, you have 18, okay. As of January 1, 2012, the beginning is 20, and then at the end, 12/31, 2012, our rate is 25, okay, tapos magdagdag pa tayo dito. The weighted average for 2012, assuming that today is 2012, this year is 2012, no? Ang average natin is 23. So, yun, 23. And then the beginning balance, which is translated, no, of our retained earnings is 3 million. 3? Okay, 3 million. So, using the current rate method, paano po ba yung current rate method natin? Dito tayo. ano yung i-multiply mo dito? Your cash, AR, land, building. Okay? Ay, wait lang. Mas maganda to kapag meron pa tayong revenues pala. Revenues and expenses. Maybe I can put it somewhere here. No? You have here your revenues. Assuming that your total revenue is 260, and then your total expenses is 160 para saktong 100. And this includes depreciation. Includes na po siya depreciation of 20 ayun, 20,000. So your net income will be 100,000. Yan para makita niyo. Dito tayo mag-uumpisa. Ideally, they should be translated using your historical rate, but for practicality, we'll just use the weighted average. So what is our weighted average rate? For 2012, it is 23. So you multiply this by 23. 20, wala na. 23. So shortcut mo ito, 23. Diba? May mga calculator naman kayo. I'm sure kaya-kaya yung i-multiply yan. And this one will now become 2,300,000. Now, let's assume that this is these are in, let's say, foreign currency. And these are your exchange rates, no? Okay. How many pesos for every one foreign currency? Okay, so you now have 2, 3. Okay. Ito yata, if I remember, parang 5 million something. Nasaan ba yung kodigo ko? Pero paki-check na lang. It's 59. Nawala na. It's 5980. Ayun, nahanap ko na yung kodigo ko. And this one is 3,680,000. Okay, sana wag magloko yung computer para hindi ako mag-back to zero ulit. Ayan, dito naman tayo. Okay, tapos na tayo sa income statement. Right? Let's go to your balance sheet. For your cash, AR, land, all your assets and liabilities, we are going to use the closing rate. What is the closing rate? You have 25. Okay? So, you multiply all of this using 25. Nako, nagloloko na yung laptop ko. So, ito rin times 25 times 25. What about your stockholders' equity items? Okay, we are going to translate them using the historical rate. Okay, so for your common stock, okay, our rate will be 15 nung nag-umpisa siya. Assuming lang na nag-umpisa siya at yan lang yung na-issue. So, 15 yan, historical rate. What about your retained earnings? Your retained earnings was will be computed later. So, dito muna tayo. Ayan. Naku, mabagal na yung laptop ko. So, 6,000 times, 60,000 times 25, this one is 1,500,000. Okay? Now, what about your AR? 100,000 times 25, that's 2,500,000. Your land, that will be 200,000 times 25, 5 million yen. Pwede ko naman kasing i-shortcut yan, pero sige na nga. Ano pa? 400,000 times 25, o di parang times 2 lang yun, 10 million. lahat naman yan times 25. Sana, eto na lang yung minultiply ko ng 25, di ba? So, you get a total of 3, 8, 18, 5, 5, 19 million. Laptop. Okay, so this should be your total assets. Ibig sabihin, this should also be your total liabilities and stockholders equity. O, di ilagay na natin. This should be 19 million. Para maintindihan nyo yung sinasabi ko na adjustment. Okay, 100,000 times 25, you will get 2,500,000. 200,000 times 25, this one will be 5 million. Okay, 100,000 times 15. That will be 1,500,000. Ta-da! Therefore, your translated retained earnings, is, hindi pala therefore. Let's go to your translated retained earnings. Okay. The beginning balance was translated at 3 million. And then, you will have your translated net income, which is 2,300,000. Your dividends at historical rate, pero wala nga palang dividends, so lagay natin 0. So, the ending balance is now 5,300,000. Balance na ba? 5 million. Ayun. We now have 5,300,000. Iwasan na natin ito. I just need more space. Lagay natin dito. You have retained earnings, which is 360,000. And then, meron tayong cumulative translation adjustment. So, if this one is 19 million, so you have 2, 5, this one will be, magkano to? 13 million, 14 million, 300. Dapat 19 million yan. So, magkano yung idadagdag natin? It should be 4 million. $700,000. So that's how you compute your cumulative translation adjustment, which is part of your stockholders' equity. Whew. As a review, we started with the income statement because we need your 2-3 to compute for your translated retained earnings. Okay, so lagay mo na yan. Na-translate mo na lahat. Hindi pa rin balanse. Ang balancing figure natin will be your cumulative translation adjustment. Okay po. So, ayun. Feel free to screen capture. Now, what if nandun naman tayo sa hyperinflationary economy? Ang sabi dito, sa hyperinflationary economy, hatiin mo sa monetary at non-monetary. So, assuming this is monetary, yung cash at AR natin, yung land, ito ay non-monetary. Okay po? So, pag non-monetary, magiging historical rate po yan. Okay? So, ayun. Kaya magbabago na rin yan. Okay, wala na. Mabagal na yung computer ko. Okay? Ano pa yung kailangan nating baguhin dito? Pati doon sa liabilities natin. Okay? Ano dito yung accounts payable, that will be monetary. Also yung mortgage payable, sige gawin na natin monetary yan. Your CS, that will now be using historical. Wait lang. Okay, sige, tama, historical. And then, historical ba natin? Ay, 2007, o tama, 15. And then, yung retained earnings. Nako, ito yung problema, kailangan mag-translate tayo. And then, for hyperinflationary, wala po tayong cumulative translation adjustment. Okay po? So, nasaan na ngayon? Meron ka na ditong gain or loss. Naku, itong monetary na to na depreciation, magbabago lahat yan. Masakit sa ulo yan. So, ilalagay ngayon natin dito. Magkakaroon ka ng translation gain or loss. Okay. So, let's see. Ano pa ba yung mga kailangan nating burahin dito? Itong arrow na to. Ito, baka hindi rin ito masundan mamaya. Okay. Anyway, we will just adjust as we go along. So, 1515. Ito ay bakit 18? Dapat pala 15 ito. 15 ang gamitin natin. So, you will now have 15, 15, 15. Okay. So, land, 200,000 times 15, this will be 3 million. Okay, 400,000 times 15, so magkano yun? That will be 6 million. Okay, so this will now be how much? 1525, that's 4, 10 million on. Ay, 10 million to, no, it's 13 million. Wala na, mabagal na. Okay, let's see. 1525. Kasi ito ay 4, 10. So, dapat 13 million. Sana makisama naman na ito. Okay. So, ibig sabihin, ito dapat ay 13 million din siya. Okay, 25. 25. Historical, 15. Paano yung retained earnings natin? Dapat, ang retained earnings mo dito ay, work back tayo, di ba? So, this one is 25 plus 15, ay, 25 plus 5 plus 1,000,005. So, this one is 9 million versus 13 billion. That will now be 4 million dapat to. Tingnan nyo na lang yung process. Paki-check nyo na lang kung meron kayong calculator dyan. Okay, so, 4 million dapat ito. Ganun. Okay, so that should be your total, no? Ngayon, 4 million na ba? Ang beginning, 3 million. So, ang net income niya dapat ay wala na. Naghahang na naman. Kaya dapat ito na ngayon ay 1 1 million. Para maging 4 million ngayon yung retained earnings natin. Okay, so yung revenue natin, okay lang yan, weighted average, ganun din yung expense, but this one, it has to be recomputed. Why? Out of this 160, may sinulat ako kanina 20,000 of this, okay, refers to depreciation. Okay, and in this case, you are going to use your historical rate. Okay, and what is your historical rate? The historical rate is 15. Ayan. Kaya ito ngayon, magiging 140 na lang. Okay, 140 na lang yung gagamitan mo ng 23, and then yung 20,000 na depreciation, gagamitan natin ng historical rate, which is 15. Okay, so let's try to compute that. 140 times 23 equals 3,220,000. So, let me write that down. Ito yung magiging expense mo. 3,200,000. Ayaw makisama yung pen ko. Ayan, 3,220,000. Take note, 160 yan ha. Pero ito nga lang, we're going to use historical rate kasi non-monetary item yan. So, 20 times 15, that will be 15, 300,000. Okay po. Ayan. So, ano na yung next na gagawin natin? Ang net income mo dapat, dito ay for 1 million. That should be your net income. Let's try to compute. Okay? If your translated revenue is 5,980,000, calculator mo, no? Minus 3,220,000 minus 300. Okay? You will have 2,460,000. Yan, na net income. Dapat 1 million lang. So, minus 1 million. Meron tayong translation na 1. Translation of gain or loss na 1, 4, 6, 0. Yan, 1, 2, 3. Okay po. So, ayun, let's review. Monetary, closing rate. Okay. Monetary, closing rate. Non-monetary, historical rate. Yan. So, nung ginawa natin yon, nag-adjust yan. Excuse mo, this should be your retained earnings. Your beginning translated retained earnings is 3 million. Okay? And the ending balance, para mag-balance yan, should be 4 million. Then, you should have 1 million as your translated net income. If you translate your revenues and expenses, take note your expenses, out of 160, 20,000 pertains to depreciation. Assumption lang yan. So, this one, since it's monetary average, 23. Okay. What about this depreciation? Historical, which is 15. Ayan. So, nakalagay naman dun building, land, mortgage payable, and CS all happened in 2007. Okay, kunyari tama yung pagkakakalculator ko. Ayan, pag binawas mo ito minus this. Okay, may iwan kang 2,760,000 minus 300 magiging 2,460,000. So, dapat 1 million lang. So, meron kang gain or loss. This one is considered as a loss para ma-deduct. Okay? Now, 1,460. Okay, so that's it for translation. Thank you very much for listening.